The manila envelope arrived 3 days after the funeral, delivered by a courier who asked for my signature twice. "From the offices of Wellington and Frost," he explained, his voice flat and professional. Inside was my grandmother's will, naming me the sole beneficiary of her $2 million estate, and the letter that would expose a family conspiracy spanning decades. My name is Emma Parker, and I was about to discover that my grandmother's fortune wasn't the only inheritance she'd left me. Some legacies are written in blood, others in secrets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stood in the kitchen of my small apartment, staring at the contents spread across the counter. Legal papers, property deeds, bank statements, and that sealed letter with "to be read only after my death," written in Grandma Rose's elegant handwriting. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, forgotten amid the shock of what I was reading. "This can't be right," I whispered to the empty room. According to the will, not my father, not my aunts, not my cousins who had circled Grandma Rose like vultures in her final months, was to inherit everything. The Victorian house on Maple Street where she'd lived for 50 years. The vacation cottage on Hemlock Lake. The investment portfolio that had quietly grown over decades. The antique collection worth hundreds of thousands. All of it. Mine. My phone buzzed angrily on the counter. Dad, again. That made 17 missed calls since yesterday. I knew exactly what he wanted to discuss. I checked the time. 8:47 a.m. In 15 minutes, I needed to be at the animal shelter where I worked. Grandma Rose had always supported my choice to work with rescue animals, even when my father called it squandering potential. She understood that not all value could be measured in dollars. Now I wondered if she'd understood more than any of us had realized. The phone buzzed again. This time, Aunt Patricia's name flashed on the screen. I silenced it and slipped the phone into my pocket. The shelter first, family drama later. As I gathered the papers, my fingers lingered on Grandma's sealed letter. The attorney had been explicit. This was separate from the will, to be opened privately. Something about the weight of it, the thickness of the envelope, made my stomach knot. Whatever was inside, Grandma Rose had wanted only me to know. I tucked it carefully into my messenger bag and headed out the door. The autumn air bit through my jacket as I walked the 6 blocks to Hopeful Paws Animal Shelter. Fallen leaves crunched beneath my boots, their colors reminding me of Grandma's garden in October. She'd loved autumn most of all. The season of preparation, she'd called. Nature battening down for what's to come. My boss Keisha looked up from the reception desk when I walked in, her brow furrowed immediately. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, sliding a cup of coffee toward me. "And you're late, which has happened exactly never in the 3 years you've worked here." I shrugged off my jacket. "Sorry, family stuff." "The will?" Her voice softened. Keisha had met Grandma Rose several times when she'd come to the shelter to donate supplies. They'd taken an immediate liking to each other, two no-nonsense women, with sharp minds and sharper tongues. I nodded, busying myself with checking the feeding charts for our current residents. "It's official. She left everything to me." Everything? As in, everything. The houses, the investments, the collections, all of it. Keisha whistled low. "Your dad must be furious," I finished for her, along with the rest of the family, hence the 20-something missed calls. She leaned against the counter, studying me. "And how do you feel about suddenly being a millionaire?" The question caught me off guard. How did I feel? Overwhelmed, certainly. Confused as to why Grandma Rose had chosen me over her own children. Grateful, but also terrified of the responsibility. And beneath it all, suspicious. There had to be more to this story. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "It doesn't feel real." "Well, when it does," Keisha said with a smile, Remember your friends at the shelter in your philanthropic endeavors. You'll be first on the list, I promised, slipping into the routine of morning chores. For a few hours, I lost myself in the work, cleaning cages, administering medications, walking dogs, and socializing the Shire cats. The animals didn't care about inheritance disputes or family drama. Their needs were immediate and honest. But as lunchtime approached, my phone continued to vibrate persistently. Finally, during my break, I stepped outside to the small courtyard and returned my father's call. He answered on the first ring. "Finally," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "We need to talk about your grandmother's will." "Hello to you too, Dad." "Don't get smart with me, Emma. This is serious. Patty and I have been trying to reach you since yesterday." I watched a squirrel dart across the courtyard, burying acorns for winter. "I've been working." "Well, you might not need that job anymore, will you?" The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. "Not with what she's left you." "Dad, she wasn't in her right mind, Emma. You know that. The dementia was getting worse these last months. We're contesting the will." The words hit like a slap. "What? Grandma didn't have dementia. She was sharp as ever until the stroke." His laugh was harsh. "That's not what her doctor will say. We've already spoken with him." My grip tightened on the phone. "What did you do?" "Nothing that wouldn't have been necessary if she'd just done the sensible thing. That estate should be divided among the family, not given to a—" He cut himself off. "Not given to a what, Dad? A shelter worker? Someone who doesn't care about money the way you do?" The silence stretched between us, filled with years of disappointment. My father had wanted me to follow him into finance, to attend his alma mater, to value what he valued. Every choice I'd made that diverted from his plan had been a betrayal, in his eyes. "The family is meeting tonight at Patty's house," he finally said. 7 o'clock? Be there. And if I'm not, then we proceed without your input." He hung up. I stared at the phone, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. They were going to try to invalidate Grandma's will, to paint her as mentally incompetent, to erase her final wishes. When I went back inside, Keisha took one look at my face and pulled me into the office. "That bad, huh?" I sank into a chair. "They're contesting the will. Dad says Grandma had dementia, which is absolute garbage. He claims they've already talked to her doctor." She frowned. "That doesn't sound right. Your grandmother was one of the most mentally acute elderly people I've ever met." "Exactly. But they'll say whatever they need to. It's always been like this with my family. Everything is about control, about appearances." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. "They're meeting tonight to discuss it. Are you going?" I thought about facing them. My father with his cold disappointment, Aunt Patricia with her passive-aggressive barbs, my cousins with their jealous stares. All of them united against me, determined to overturn Grandma's wishes. "I have to," I said finally. "If I don't show up, it's just proof to them that I don't deserve any of this." Keisha squeezed my shoulder. "Want backup? I make an excellent intimidating friend." The offer made me smile despite everything. "Thanks, but this is something I need to handle myself." As I said it, I remembered the letter, still unopened in my bag. Perhaps Grandma Rose had anticipated this very situation. Perhaps she'd left me more than just property and money. She'd left me answers. "Actually," I said, reaching for my bag, "I need to read something first." Keisha nodded, understanding. "Use the office as long as you need." When she closed the door behind her, I took out the envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal and withdrew several pages covered in Grandma Rose's distinctive handwriting. The letter was dated just 3 months ago, well before her stroke. "My dearest Emma," it began. If you're reading this, then Wellington has done as instructed and delivered my will and this letter after my passing. I imagine by now the vultures are circling. I let out a startled laugh. Even from beyond the grave, Grandma didn't mince words. There are things you need to know. About your inheritance, yes. But more importantly, about our family. Things I've protected you from until now. The estate I've left you isn't merely a matter of preference or affection, though you know you've always been special to me. It's a matter of justice. Long overdue justice. My breath caught as I read the next lines. Your father and his sister believe they're entitled to my estate because they're my children. What they've conveniently forgotten is how they came by their own fortunes 30 years ago, by stealing from the person who trusted them most. The companies they built, the wealth they've accumulated, all of it began with theft. From your grandfather. From me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The rest of the letter fell into my lap as I stared at the wall, trying to make sense of what I'd just read. My father, who prided himself on his business ethics, who had lectured me endlessly about integrity, a thief? It couldn't be true. But as I picked up the pages and continued reading, Grandma Rose laid out a story that turned my understanding of my family upside down, and she had proof she'd kept hidden for 3 decades, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. The final page contained instructions, specific, detailed instructions about what to do next, who to contact, where to find the evidence she'd safeguarded all these years. Remember, Emma, she'd written in closing, the truth isn't always kind, but it is always necessary. You have more of your grandfather in you than anyone else in this family. He would be proud of the woman you've become. I certainly am. Now, it's time to set things right. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I took out my phone and made a call. Not to my father, not to Aunt Patricia, but to the number Grandma Rose had provided in her letter. Wellington and Frost Law Offices, a receptionist answered. This is Emma Parker, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I need to speak with Mr. Wellington about my grandmother's contingency plan. There was a pause, then, "One moment, please, Ms. Parker. He's been expecting your call." As I waited to be connected, I looked out the window at the autumn leaves swirling in the courtyard. Grandma had been right. This was indeed the season of preparation, and I had a family meeting to prepare for. Charles Wellington was not what I expected. I'd pictured someone older, more austere, someone who matched Grandma Rose's generation. Instead, the man who greeted me at Wellington and Frost was in his early 40s, with kind eyes behind stylish glasses and a demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Ms. Parker," he said, extending his hand. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your grandmother spoke of you often." His office was a blend of traditional and modern. Antique desk, contemporary art, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound law texts. He gestured for me to sit in one of the plush chairs across from him. "I take it you've read your grandmother's letter?" he asked once we were settled. I nodded. "It's hard to believe." "I imagine so." He opened a drawer and removed a thick file. "I've represented Rose for nearly 15 years. The contents of this file have been kept under strict confidentiality all that time." He placed the file on the desk between us. "Rose Parker was an extraordinary woman. She came to me after your grandfather Harold's death, concerned about certain irregularities in his business affairs." "The theft my father and aunt committed," I said, still struggling with the concept. Wellington's expression remained neutral, professional. "According to the evidence Rose collected, yes. Your grandfather built Parker Developments from nothing. By the time your father and aunt joined the company in the early 90s, it was worth millions." He opened the file, revealing photographs, documents, and what looked like financial statements. When Harold died suddenly of a heart attack in 1994, your father and aunt were quick to take control. Within months, they had divided the company's assets between them, formed two new separate entities, and effectively dissolved the original Parker Developments. But that's not illegal, I said. Dad always said Grandpa wanted the company split between his children. Wellington's mouth tightened. That might have been the case, except your grandfather left explicit instructions in his will about the company's future, instructions that were never followed. He handed me a document, a copy of my grandfather's will. I skimmed it, legal terminology swimming before my eyes, until I reached a clause highlighted in yellow. Parker Developments is to remain intact, with 60% ownership divided equally between my children, 30% held in trust for my grandchildren, and 10% to be given to my wife Rose, along with permanent position as chairperson of the board of directors. I looked up. They ignored this completely. Worse, Wellington said, his voice grim. According to your grandmother, the will that was actually filed with the court was different. That clause was removed entirely, replaced with language giving your father and aunt full discretion over the company's future. My head spun. Are you saying they forged the will? Rose believed so, yes. But by the time she discovered the discrepancy, nearly a year had passed. The probate had been completed. The original company no longer existed. But surely there was something she could do? Legal action she could take? Wellington's sigh was heavy with old frustration. We explored every avenue. The problem was evidence. The original will had mysteriously disappeared from Harold's study after his death. The only copy was the one filed with the court, the one Rose believed had been altered. So she just gave up? That didn't sound like the grandmother I knew. Not at all. A smile touched his lips. Rose Parker never gave up on anything in her life. But she was strategic. Without concrete proof, a legal battle would have been risky and potentially devastating for all involved, including you. I frowned. Me? I was just a child. Exactly. She worried about what a prolonged legal fight would do to you, to the family relationships. So instead, she began gathering evidence, methodically, patiently, for nearly 3 decades. He turned, the file toward me. Everything is here. Financial records showing money being siphoned from Parker Developments in the months before Harold's death. Correspondence between your father and aunt discussing plans for the company that directly contradicted Harold's wishes. Testimony from the family's former household staff about documents being removed from Harold's study the night he died. My stomach clenched. The implications were staggering. And Grandma kept all this secret? For 30 years? Not entirely. Secret. She confronted your father and aunt once, about 5 years after Harold died. By then, they had built their separate empires, Hartwell Finance and Patricia's Luxury Developments. What happened? Wellington's expression darkened. According to Rose, they threatened her, said if she pursued it, they would make sure you would never see a penny of the family money. You were just starting college then, I believe. I nodded, numbly. That was when Dad had suddenly offered to pay for my education, something he'd previously insisted I should finance myself through scholarships and loans. I'd been so grateful, never questioning the sudden change of heart. It was a bribe, I whispered, to keep Grandma quiet. She believed so, yes. She agreed to their terms on one condition, that they never interfere with her relationship with you. That explained why Dad, despite his endless disappointment in my career choices, had never tried to stop me from visiting Grandma Rose, why he'd tolerated our closeness even while keeping his own distance from his mother. But why leave everything to me now? Why not just split it evenly? Avoid all this drama? Wellington smiled. Because Rose believed in justice, even delayed justice. and because she knew you were the only one who would honor her wishes. He pulled another document from the file. This is what she wanted you to see today. It was a handwritten note, dated the year my grandfather died. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My grandfather's. My dearest Rose, if you're reading this, then my fears have been realized. I've seen the way Robert and Patricia watch the company, calculating its worth even as I struggled to teach them its value. I've changed my will to protect what we've built, but I worry it won't be enough. Trust Wellington if anything happens. He has copies of everything. And whatever comes, make sure Emma knows the truth someday. She has your spirit and my sense of justice. Our legacy will be safe with her. All my love, always. Harold tears blurred my vision. I'd been too young when Grandpa died to really remember him. Now his words reached across time, a connection I'd never expected to feel. There's one more thing, Wellington said gently. He retrieved a small wooden box from a cabinet behind his desk. Rose left this in our safekeeping. The key is taped inside the back cover of her letter to you. Sure enough, when I checked Grandma's letter, I found a small brass key. The box opened with a click, revealing an old pocket watch, a ring with a deep blue stone, and a USB drive. The watch and ring were Harold's, Wellington explained. The drive contains copies of all the evidence, plus video testimony from Rose herself, recorded over the past year as her health began to decline. I picked up the watch, felt its weight in my palm. What am I supposed to do with all this? That depends on what you want, Ms. Parker. Rose left the decision entirely to you. You could present this evidence during the will contest. It would certainly undermine your father and aunt's claim about Rose's mental competence. You could file a separate civil suit about the original theft. Or I could do nothing. I finished. Let sleeping dogs lie. He nodded. That's also an option, though not one Rose would have favored, I think. I slipped the watch into my pocket, feeling its gentle tick against my hip. I need to think. Of course. He checked. His watch. I believe you have a family meeting to attend tonight? It might be. Illuminating. As I gathered my things, a question nagged at me. Mr. Wellington, why did you agree to help Grandma with all this? It must have been frustrating, collecting evidence for decades without taking action. He smiled, a genuine smile that creased the corners of his eyes. Because 35 years ago, when I was fresh out of law school with nothing but student debt and ambition, Harold Parker gave me my first job as legal counsel for his company. He took a chance on me when no one else would. His gaze grew distant with memory. 6 months later, when I was diagnosed with cancer, he kept me on full salary during my treatment, paid for specialists when my insurance reached its limits. He straightened his glasses. I owed him, and I owed Rose for trusting me with this. Some debts transcend ordinary accounting, Ms. Parker. I left Wellington's office with the wooden box, the file of evidence, and a head spinning with revelations. The afternoon sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting Hartford's skyline in amber and gold. I had 3 hours until the family meeting, at Aunt Patricia's house. 3 hours to decide what kind of justice I was looking for. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Zoe, Aunt Patricia's daughter. Dad's bringing the family lawyer tonight. Just thought you should know. I stared at the message, feeling a flicker of anger. Of course they'd have their lawyer present. They expected to intimidate me, pressure me into accepting whatever crumbs they decided to offer. I texted back, "Thanks for the heads up. See you at 7. Then, on impulse, I called Keisha. "How do you feel about being my backup after all?" I asked, when she answered. "For the family showdown? I'm there. Want me to wear my intimidating face or my supportive face?" I laughed despite everything. "Both, and maybe bring your tablet. There's something I might need to show everyone." As I slipped the phone back in my pocket, my hand brushed against Grandpa's watch. The weight of it reminded me of Grandma Rose's words in her letter. The truth isn't always kind, but it is always necessary. Tonight, my family would learn just how necessary it could be. Aunt Patricia's house stood on a hill in Oakwood Estates, an exclusive neighborhood that screamed old money and privilege. The circular driveway already held several cars when Keisha pulled up in her battered Honda. The contrast couldn't have been more perfect. My father's gleaming BMW, my cousin Dylan's sports car, and my aunt's Range Rover all lined up like an advertisement for success. "Nice place," Keisha whistled, eyeing the three-story colonial with its perfectly manicured hedges and glowing windows. Very Architectural Digest meets Old School Dynasty. I smoothed my skirt, suddenly aware of how underdressed I was in my work clothes. I hadn't gone home to change after meeting Wellington, hadn't wanted to give myself time to second-guess my decision. "You sure about this?" Keisha asked, nodding toward the wooden box on my lap. "No," I admitted. "But Grandma Rose was right. It's time." The front door opened before we reached it, revealing Aunt Patricia in a silk blouse and tailored trousers, pearls gleaming at her throat. Her smile faltered when she saw Keisha. "Emma, darling, we weren't expecting guests." "This is Keisha Henderson, my boss and friend. She's here as my support person. Since Dad mentioned you'd have the family lawyer present, I thought I should have someone in my corner as well." Patricia's lips thinned, but she stepped aside. Everyone's in the living room. The tension in the air was palpable as we entered. My father stood by the fireplace in full power pose, legs slightly apart, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a tumbler of scotch. My cousin Dylan lounged on the sofa, pretending to look at his phone. His sister Zoe perched nervously on an ottoman, giving me a small wave. At the dining table sat an older man with steel gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, Howard Brenner, the family attorney who'd handled Parker affairs for decades. "Finally," my father said, not bothering with a greeting. "And you've brought company." "This is Keisha," I said firmly. "She stays." Brenner raised an eyebrow but said nothing, merely shuffling papers in front of him. "Let's get this over with," my father continued. "We've prepared a very generous offer, Emma, despite the irregularities in Mother's will." "Irregularities?" I set the box on the coffee table. "Grandma Rose was of sound mind when she made her will, Dad. You know that." "The medical records suggest otherwise," Patricia cut in, handing me a folder. "Dr. Lewis has documented signs of cognitive decline going back 18 months. I opened the folder, scanning the clinical notes with mounting disbelief. "These are fabricated. Grandma saw Dr. Lewis twice a year for routine checkups. I drove her to most of them." Brenner cleared his throat. "Ms. Parker, I understand this is difficult, but medical professionals can be bought," Keisha finished, arms crossed, "just like anyone else." The room fell silent. Zoe stared at her hands, a flush creeping up her neck. Dylan had finally stopped pretending interest in his phone. My father set down his glass with a sharp click. "I don't appreciate what you're implying." "Then let me be explicit," I said, drawing Grandpa's pocket watch from my jacket. The gold caught the light as I placed it beside the box. "Grandma Rose left me more than just her estate. She left me the truth about how you and Aunt Patricia built your fortunes." Patricia paled, her hand going to her pearls. "What are you talking about?" I turned to Brenner. "Mr. Brenner, you've represented my father and aunt for what, 30 years now? Were you the one who helped them file the altered version of my grandfather's will after his death?" The attorney's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "I'm not at liberty to—" "Because we have a copy of the original," I continued, opening the wooden box and removing the USB drive. Along with 30 years of evidence showing how they systematically dismantled Parker Developments against Grandpa's explicit wishes, siphoned assets before his death, and built their separate empires on stolen foundations. "This is ridiculous," my father snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. Mother always did have an overactive imagination. Did she imagine these? I pulled documents from the file Wellington had given me. Bank statements, correspondence, photographs of documents being removed from safes. "Or these?" I added, revealing financial analyses showing the systematic asset stripping of Parker. Developments in the months before and after Grandpa's death. Zoe stood up, moving closer to look at the papers. "Dad? What is she talking about?" Patricia grabbed her daughter's arm. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it concerns all of us," I countered, "especially Zoe and Dylan. According to Grandpa's real will, 30% of Parker Developments was supposed to be held in trust for his grandchildren. That's you two. Money that should have been yours was diverted to build your parents' companies." Dylan finally put his phone down, expression darkening. "Is that true?" My father's face had turned to stone. "This is ancient history. Whatever? Your grandmother told you." "She didn't just tell me, she showed me. And now I'm showing all of you." I pulled out my tablet and connected the USB drive. Grandma left a video testimony too, recorded 6 months ago, well before her stroke. Let's see what Dr. Lewis would say about her cognitive state then. Patricia lunged forward, trying to grab the tablet. "This is completely inappropriate." Keisha stepped between us. "Touch her or that tablet and I'm calling the police. Assaulting someone over evidence of fraud doesn't look good in court." Brenner stood up, adjusting his glasses nervously. "Perhaps we should all take a moment to what? Cover this up again?" I looked directly at him. "Mr. Wellington at Wellington and Frost has copies of everything I've shown you today. If anything happens to me or this evidence, it goes straight to the district attorney's office." At the mention of Wellington's name, Brenner's composure cracked. "Wellington is involved in this?" "He's been involved since the beginning," I said. Grandpa trusted him, unlike some other lawyers in this room. My father and Brenner exchanged glances that spoke volumes. I hit play on the video. Grandma Rose's face filled the screen, dignified, clear-eyed, and unmistakably sound of mind. She sat in her favorite armchair, wearing the blue cardigan I'd given her for Christmas. "My name is Rose Eleanor Parker," she began, her voice steady. "Today is October 3rd, 2024. I am recording this testimony of sound mind and body to accompany the evidence I've gathered regarding the theft and fraud committed by my children, Robert and Patricia Parker, following the death of my husband Harold in 1994. For the next 10 minutes, no one spoke as Grandma methodically laid out the entire sordid story, from her suspicions before Grandpa's death to her discovery of the forged will, to her years of quiet investigation. She named names, cited documents, referenced bank accounts. When the video ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Zoe had tears streaming down her face. Dylan stared at his parents with undisguised disgust. My father and aunt stood frozen, decades of carefully constructed facades crumbling before their eyes. "You would do this to your own family?" Patricia finally whispered, her voice breaking. "Destroy everything we've built?" "You did this," I corrected her. "I'm just bringing it to light." My father regained his composure first. "What do you want, Emma? Money? A position at the company? Name your price." I felt a surge of anger. "This isn't about a payoff. It's about truth. It's about honoring Grandpa and Grandma's wishes." "Fine. Take the inheritance. We won't contest the will." He tried to sound magnanimous, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. "Keep your evidence to yourself, and we'll let you have Rose's estate without a fight." Brenner nodded eagerly. "I can draw up paperwork immediately. A mutual non-disclosure. Agreement, perhaps. I looked around the room, at my father's desperation, my aunt's fear, my cousin's shock and hurt. This was what decades of lies had built, a family fractured by greed. "No," I said quietly. My father frowned. "No? What do you mean, no?" "I mean that's not good enough. Grandma Rose left me the estate because she trusted me to do the right thing with it, and with this information." "And what would that be?" Patricia asked, her voice laced with bitterness. I reached into my bag and pulled out a document I'd asked Wellington to prepare after our meeting. "This is my proposal. I'm establishing the Harold and Rose Parker Foundation using the entire estate. The foundation will have 3 main initiatives: supporting animal welfare, funding education for disadvantaged students, and helping entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds." I slid the document across the table. "I'm inviting both of you to make significant contributions to the foundation, not just money, but expertise. Dad, you know finance. Aunt Patricia, you understand property development. Together, we could build something meaningful, something that honors Grandpa's legacy the way it should have been honored 30 years ago." They stared at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. "And if we refuse?" my father asked. I met his gaze steadily. "Then the evidence goes to the authorities and to the press. Your choice." Dylan stood up. "I want in on the foundation, regardless of what they decide." Zoe nodded. "Me too." My father's face reddened. "You can't possibly—" "Actually, it makes perfect sense," Keisha interjected. "The foundation would clean up the family name, give you a tax write-off, and keep this whole mess private. Or you can risk prison for fraud and watch your company's stock prices tank when this hits the news." She shrugged. "Seems like an easy choice to me." Brenner cleared his throat. "If I may, the foundation approach does offer certain advantages, legally speaking." My father and aunt exchanged glances, a silent conversation happening between siblings who, despite everything, still understood each other perfectly. "We need time to consider," my father finally said. "You have until tomorrow at noon," I replied, gathering my evidence and returning it to the box. After that, Mr. Wellington proceeds as instructed. As Keisha and I turned to leave, Zoe caught my arm. "Did you know? Before Grandma died?" I shook my head. "Not until I read her letter. She wanted to protect me from it, I think. Until it was time." "All these years," she whispered. "All the family gatherings, the birthdays, the holidays. It was all built on lies." I thought about it for a moment. Not all of it. Grandma's love was real. Her principles were real. I touched Grandpa's watch in my pocket. And now we have a chance to build something real, too. Outside, the night. Air felt cleansing after the suffocating tension of the house. Stars pricked the darkness above the manicured lawns and towering oaks of Oakwood Estates. "That," Keisha said as we walked to her car, "was the most badass thing I've ever seen." I laughed, the sound surprising me. "I can't believe I just did that." "Your grandmother would be proud." "I hope so." I looked back at the house where silhouettes moved behind lit windows, my family, grappling with the truth that had finally found its way home. "I really hope so." My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "They're arguing, but Dylan and I are standing firm with you. Foundation idea is perfect. Call me tomorrow?" Something tight in my chest loosened. You know what? I think she would be. As we drove away, I felt Grandpa's watch ticking against my heart. Steady, reliable, keeping perfect time. Just like the truth. The call came at 10:37 the next morning. I was at Grandma Rose's Victorian on Maple Street, boxing up some of her books for donation, when my father's name appeared on my phone screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I remembered Grandma's voice from the video. The hardest part of integrity isn't standing up for what's right, It's continuing to do so when it would be easier to look away. I pressed accept. Hello, Dad. We're in. His voice was clipped, professional, the same tone he used for business deals. Patricia and I have discussed your proposal. The foundation is acceptable. I sat down on Grandma's floral couch, a bubble of disbelief rising in my chest. Just like that? We have conditions, he continued, ignoring my question. First, all evidence remains private, permanently. Second, we want board positions on the foundation, with real decision-making authority. Third, we want public recognition, as co-founders. Of course they did. Even in defeat, they were negotiating for control, for appearance. Counter-proposal, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. The evidence remains private as long as you both comply with the Foundation's mission. You can have advisory positions, not board seats, for the first 5 years, to be re-evaluated based on your contributions. As for public recognition, you'll be acknowledged as major donors. A long silence followed. I could almost hear the calculations running through his head, weighing risk against pride. Dylan and Zoe get board seats, he finally said. From the beginning. That's fair, I agreed. They're Grandpa's grandchildren, too. They deserve to benefit from his legacy all along. Another pause. Brenner is drawing up the paperwork. We can meet at Wellington's office at 3. So we were doing this on neutral ground. Interesting. I'll be there. He cleared his throat, and for a moment I thought he might say something personal. Something about yesterday's revelations, about Grandma Rose, about the decades of deception. Instead, don't be late. And the call disconnected. I stared at the phone, then at the framed photo on Grandma's mantel. A family portrait from 20 years ago, all of us posed and smiling for the camera. The frame was silver, expensive, but the smiles were brittle, hiding fractures that had been there all along. Only Grandma's smile reached her eyes, warm and knowing even then. This is just the beginning, isn't it? I said to her image. The hard part comes next. My phone buzzed with a text from Wellington. Your father called. Meeting at 3. I'm impressed. I texted back. Don't be. They're trying to salvage what they can. His response came quickly. That's how healing starts, one compromise at a time. I wasn't sure I believed that, but I wanted to, for Grandma's sake, for mine. I spent the next few hours continuing to sort through Grandma's belongings, finding small treasures tucked away in drawers and closets, handwritten recipes, vintage brooches, photographs I'd never seen before. In her bedroom closet, behind a row of sensible shoes, I discovered a small lacquered box containing dozens of letters tied with blue ribbon. They were from Grandpa to Grandma, spanning decades of their marriage. I read just one, dated shortly after they were married, and had to stop, my vision blurred by tears at the pure, uncomplicated love expressed in his words. This was the legacy Grandma had truly wanted me to have, not just the money or property, but the understanding of what integrity and love looked like when they weren't corrupted by greed. I carefully returned the letters to their box, promising myself I'd read them all eventually. At 2:30, I left for Wellington's office, the wooden box with Grandpa's watch and all the evidence secured in my bag. The city hummed around me as I walked the few blocks from where I'd parked, people rushing about their lives, unaware of the small drama of justice about to unfold in a lawyer's office above them. Wellington met me in the lobby. Your father and aunt are already here. With Brenner and a second attorney I don't recognize. Of course they brought reinforcements, I said, unsurprised. What about my cousins? They arrived separately just a few minutes ago. His eyes crinkled with amusement. They asked if they could sit on your side of the table. Something warm unfurled in my chest. Good. I'd like that. The conference room was all polished wood and leather, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. My father and Aunt Patricia sat on one side of the large table, flanked by Brenner and a sharp-looking woman in a charcoal suit. Zoe and Dylan had indeed positioned themselves on the opposite side, leaving space for me and Wellington. No one spoke as we entered. The stack of documents in the center of the table seemed to command all attention, the physical manifestation of the compromise we were about to forge. "Before we begin," Wellington said once we were seated, "I want to make it clear that today's agreement includes Ms. Parker's forbearance from pursuing legal action regarding the Parker Developments matter, contingent upon full compliance with the Foundation's terms. This is not amnesty. It's a conditional ceasefire." Brenner bristled. "There's no need for dramatic language, Charles. Just clarity, Howard." Wellington's smile was pleasant but firm. "After 30 years of obfuscation, I think we all deserve that much." My father cleared his throat. "Let's focus on the present arrangement." For the next 2 hours, we negotiated the details of the Harold and Rose Parker Foundation. The second attorney, introduced as Elise Chen, a specialist in nonprofit law, actually proved helpful, identifying tax advantages and structural recommendations that would make the foundation more effective. Despite myself, I was impressed by how quickly my father and aunt pivoted from defense to strategic contribution, offering contacts and insights that would genuinely benefit the foundation's work. Zoe, who worked in marketing, volunteered to develop the foundation's brand identity. "We should emphasize Grandpa and Grandma's values: innovation, education, compassion. And integrity," I added quietly, looking directly at my father. His gaze dropped to the papers before him, a muscle working in his jaw. "The annual report should highlight impact metrics," Dylan suggested. His background in data analytics suddenly seemed perfectly suited to this new venture. Transparent reporting builds trust with donors and the community. By 5 o'clock, we had a framework that satisfied everyone, or at least that no one actively opposed. The foundation would launch in 3 months, using Grandma's estate as seed funding. My father and aunt would make substantial annual contributions, both financial and professional. Zoe, Dylan, and I would serve as the initial board, with provision for expansion as the foundation grew. As Wellington's assistant brought in the final documents for signature, my father suddenly stood up. "I need a moment with my daughter," he said, his voice tight. "Alone." The others exchanged glances, but filed out without comment. When the door closed behind them, he remained standing, looking out the window at the city skyline turning golden in the late afternoon light. "Your grandfather was a better man than I am," he said finally. "That's not an excuse, just a fact." I waited, unsure where this was going. "He built his company from nothing, working 16-hour days, mortgaging our house twice when things got tough." He turned to face me. "Patricia and I grew up watching him sacrifice everything for that company. When he died, we thought. We convinced ourselves we deserved more than what he'd allocated, that we'd earned it. By changing, is Will?" My voice was quiet but steady. "By erasing his wishes?" He flinched. "It was Patricia's idea at first, but I went along with it. And once we started, there was no going back." He ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "Your grandmother knew immediately, of course. She always saw through us. But she couldn't prove it. Until now." "Until now," he agreed. "She was smarter than both of us combined, playing the long game while we congratulated ourselves on our cleverness." The admission hung between us, perhaps the most honest thing he'd ever said. To me. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. "Because I'm tired, Emma. Tired of the person I became. Tired of knowing what your grandfather would think of me if he could see what I did with his legacy." He gestured toward the foundation documents. This is a second chance I don't deserve. But I'm taking it anyway." I didn't trust myself to speak. After a lifetime of seeking my father's approval, here he was, seeking mine. "I can't undo the past," he continued when I remained silent. "But I can do better going forward, for Harold's sake, for Rose's, and for yours." "And for yourself," I said, finding my voice. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, selfishness dies hard." He extended his hand, not for a shake, but open-palmed, an offering. "Partners in this, at least?" I looked at his hand, then at his face, seeing for the first time the traces of grief and regret behind the mask of confidence he always wore. I thought of Grandma Rose, who had waited decades for justice but had chosen, in the end, a path that might lead to healing. I took his hand. "Partners in the foundation. The rest we'll have to work on." He nodded, accepting the limitation, the conditional nature of this fragile new beginning. When the others returned, we signed the documents without further discussion. My father and Aunt Patricia left first, followed by the attorneys. I lingered with Zoe and Dylan, the three of us somehow reluctant to end this pivotal day. "So," Dylan said, breaking the silence, "we're business partners now. Weird." Zoe laughed. "Foundation partners, technically." She looked at me, her expression turning serious. "Thank you, Emma, for giving them a way out they didn't deserve." "I didn't do it for them," I said honestly. "We know," Dylan replied. "That's why it matters." Wellington returned, carrying a bottle of champagne and 4 glasses. "I think this calls for a toast, to new beginnings." As we raised our glasses, I thought about the strange alchemy of families, how the same foundation of blood and history could produce such different outcomes in each of us. How greed had corroded my father and Aunt's integrity, while somehow leaving their children's intact. How Grandma Rose had seen something in me worth trusting with this complicated inheritance. "To Harold and Rose," I said, raising my glass higher, "may we build something worthy of them." 1 year after the foundation's creation, I stood in the attic of Grandma Rose's Victorian, dust motes dancing in the sunbeams that streamed through the small round window. The house was now the foundation's headquarters. We'd converted the first floor into offices and meeting spaces while preserving the character of the historic building. I'd moved into the top-floor apartment, finding comfort in staying connected to the place Grandma had loved. Today's mission was purely practical, preparing for the renovation of the East Wing, which meant clearing decades of accumulated belongings. Most items had already been sorted through, but the attic remained largely untouched, a treasure trove of family history boxed away and forgotten. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Found anything scandalous yet?" I smiled, typing back, "Just mouse droppings and Christmas decorations so far." Zoe and Dylan had thrown themselves into the foundation with surprising enthusiasm. Their parents' participation remained more measured. Dad attended board meetings and made his promised financial contributions, while Aunt Patricia helped secure donated office furniture and equipment. The uneasy truce held, though sometimes I caught my father watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, something between wariness and wonder. I returned to sorting through a stack of dusty boxes labeled Harold's Office. Most contained old business documents, conference, badges, and trade journals, relics of a corporate life that seemed foreign to me. I was about to set aside the final box when its contents shifted, revealing a false bottom. My pulse quickened as I carefully removed the hidden compartment. Inside lay a slim, leather-bound book, its cover cracked with age. A diary, by the looks of it. When I opened to the first yellowed page, I recognized my grandfather's handwriting immediately. January 2nd, 1991. I've decided to keep this record separate from my regular business journals. Rose thinks I'm being paranoid, but something doesn't feel right at the company. Robert has been meeting with investors behind my back. I found notes about restructuring that I never authorized. I sank onto an old trunk, transfixed as I read entry after entry documenting my grandfather's growing suspicions about my father's activities in the years before his death. He'd been aware, more aware than Grandma Rose had realized, of the scheming happening around him. April 15th, 1993. Changed my will today. Robert and Patricia won't be pleased with the new arrangement, but the company isn't just about profit. It's about the principles we built it on. Wellington assures me the new document is ironclad. I've left copies in the safe at the bank, with Wellington and one other place only Rose knows about. My hands trembled slightly. This was the will that had disappeared after his death. The one my father and aunt had replaced with their forged version. Grandpa had known they might try something. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before his fatal heart attack. October 28, 1994. Doctor says my heart is worse. I've told Rose everything, shown her where all the documents are hidden. She'll protect what matters. And someday, when Emma is old enough, she'll understand why I've arranged things as I have. There's something of me in that child, something neither Robert nor Patricia inherited, the ability to see beyond the bottom line. I closed the diary, tears stinging my eyes. All these years I'd known so little about my grandfather, yet somehow he'd known me, had seen something in his young granddaughter worth betting on. My phone rang. Wellington. I'd been sending him weekly updates on the Foundation's progress. "Emma? I have news you might find interesting," he said when I answered. "Dr. Lewis just reached out to me." My breath caught. Dr. Lewis, the physician who had provided the falsified documents about Grandma Rose's mental state. What did he want? To make amends, apparently. He's retiring next month and says he can't do so in good conscience without setting the record straight about your grandmother. He's prepared to sign an affidavit confirming that your father pressured him into falsifying those records. I sank deeper onto the trunk, Grandpa's diary clutched to my chest. Why now? Guilt is a powerful motivator, Wellington replied. Especially when retirement forces self-reflection. But there's more. He mentioned some irregularities around your grandfather's death certificate as well. What kind of irregularities? He wasn't specific, but he suggested there were questions about the cause of death that were never properly investigated. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Are you saying my grandfather's heart attack wasn't natural? I'm not saying anything definitive, Wellington cautioned. But Dr. Lewis seemed troubled by it. He wants to meet with us next week. After we hung up, I sat motionless in the dust-filled attic, turning this new information over in my mind. Had my father and aunt's betrayal gone beyond forgery and theft? Had they somehow contributed to Grandpa's death? The thought was almost too terrible to contemplate. I opened the diary again, searching for clues I might have missed. Near the back, I found a loose page tucked into the binding, a handwritten note on my grandfather's personal stationery. If anything happens to me suddenly, the key is in the blue stone. R+P must never get their hands on it. The blue stone. Grandpa's ring, the one with the deep blue stone that had been in the wooden box Grandma Rose left for me at Wellington's office. I'd kept it in my jewelry box, a treasured connection to a grandfather I barely remembered. I scrambled down from the attic, heart pounding. In my bedroom, I retrieved the ring, examining it closely for the first time. The sapphire was large, set in heavy gold with intricate engraving around the band. I turned it in my fingers, feeling for any irregularity, any sign it might contain something hidden. There, at the back of the setting, a nearly invisible seam. With trembling fingers, I pressed gently on the stone's edge. It pivoted slightly, revealing a tiny compartment beneath. Inside was what looked like a memory card, smaller than my pinky nail. My phone rang again. Zoe. "Emma, you need to come. Downstairs right now," she said without preamble, her voice tight with tension. "What's wrong?" "Dad and Aunt Patricia are here. They look angry, really angry. They're demanding to speak with you. I clutched the memory card in my palm. About what? Something about Dr. Lewis contacting your lawyer? Dad is practically purple. So they already knew. Someone at Dr. Lewis's office must have tipped them off immediately. Tell them I'll be right down, I said, making a quick decision. I slipped the memory card into an envelope along with Grandpa's diary page, addressed it to Wellington, and sealed it. I'd drop it in the outgoing mail on my way downstairs, a backup plan in case this confrontation went badly. When I entered the Foundation's main conference room, the atmosphere was electric with tension. My father paced near the windows while Aunt Patricia sat rigidly at the table. Zoe stood by the door, arms crossed defensively. Dylan was nowhere to be seen. "What's this about Lewis coming forward?" my father demanded without preamble. I kept my voice neutral. He contacted Wellington about setting the record straight regarding Grandma's mental competence. Why does that concern you? We already have our agreement in place. That agreement was predicated on discretion, Patricia snapped, on keeping family matters private. Which I've done, I replied. I didn't seek out Dr. Lewis. He came forward voluntarily. My father stopped pacing, fixing me with a hard stare. What else did he tell Wellington? I hesitated, watching his face carefully. Just that he wanted to make amends before retiring. Is there something else he should have mentioned? A flicker of relief crossed his features, quickly masked. No, nothing. But this threatens everything we've built with the Foundation. If Lewis starts talking publicly— About what? I challenged. About how you pressured him to lie about Grandma's mental state? Or about something else? Something to do with Grandpa's death, perhaps? The color drained from Patricia's face. My father went very still. What are you talking about? Zoe asked, looking between us with growing alarm. I pulled Grandpa's diary from my pocket, opening to the final entry. Grandpa knew his heart was getting worse, but according to Dr. Lewis, there may have been irregularities with his death certificate. This is absurd, my father sputtered, but his eyes kept darting to the diary in my hands. Where did you get that? From Grandpa's hidden papers, the ones you didn't manage to destroy 30 years ago. I turned to Patricia. Did you know? When you helped Dad alter the will, did you know what he had done? Done? Zoe's voice rose. What are you saying, Emma? Patricia stood abruptly. This conversation is over. Robert, we're leaving. No. Zoe blocked the doorway. I want to hear what Emma is talking about. My father's face had turned to stone, an expression I recognized from countless childhood confrontations, the wall he erected when backed into a corner. Your father didn't just change the will, I said to Zoe, never taking my eyes off my father. I think he may have had something to do with Grandpa's heart attack. Maybe stress, maybe something more direct. Dr. Lewis knows something, and that's why they're both panicking now. That's a criminal accusation, my father said, voice dangerously quiet, without a shred of proof. Then you won't mind if we hear what Dr. Lewis has to say next week, I replied. If there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to fear. Patricia grabbed her brother's arm. We need to call Brenner, now. Zoe's face had gone pale. Dad? Is this true? My father looked at his daughter, something like regret flickering across his features. Of course not. Emma is spinning conspiracy theories based on the ramblings who's looking to make a name for himself before retirement. Dr. Lewis is a respected physician with 30 years of practice, I countered. What would he gain by coming forward now if there wasn't truth to it? Zoe stepped away from her father, moving to stand beside me. I think we should hear him out. If there's nothing to hide, then this can all be cleared up easily. The betrayal in my father's eyes when he looked at his daughter was palpable. Fine, he said finally. We'll attend this meeting with Lewis, but Brenner will be there, and we'll have our own medical expert present. Agreed, I said, Transparency benefits everyone. As they left, Zoe remained behind, visibly shaken. Do you really think they could have? That Dad might have? I don't know, I answered honestly. But I found this today. I showed her the diary. Grandpa was suspicious of them before he died. And this, I held up the memory card, was hidden in his ring. I haven't had a chance to see what's on it yet. Her face hardened with determination. Let's find out. We took the memory card to the Foundation's IT specialist, a former tech industry whiz named Noah who had joined our team 3 months earlier. He examined it carefully. This is an old format, but I should be able to read it. Give me an hour. Zoe and I waited in my office, neither of us speaking much. The implications of what we might discover were too overwhelming. If my father had somehow contributed to Grandpa's death, whether through deliberate action or by causing enough stress to trigger his heart condition, what would that mean for our family? For the foundation we'd built? Noah knocked on the door. Exactly 59 minutes later, his expression grave. You need to see this. The memory card contained several files, scanned documents, some audio recordings, and a video. The documents were copies of financial records showing that my father had not just siphoned company assets, but had actively undermined projects Grandpa cared about, causing deliberate business failures to create leverage for his takeover plans. The audio recordings were even more damning. Conversations between my father and Aunt Patricia discussing how to accelerate the inevitable regarding Grandpa's health issues. But it was the video that silenced us completely. It showed Grandpa, himself, sitting at his desk, looking directly into the camera. If you're watching this, he began, then something has happened to me, and Rose has determined it's time for the truth to come forward. I've become aware that Robert and Patricia are not just planning to take control of the company, they're actively working to undermine my health. He held up a prescription bottle. My heart medication has been tampered with. I've had independent tests run, and the capsules contain only half the prescribed dose, mixed with an inert substance. Only Robert and Patricia have had access to my medication when I travel for business. I've documented everything and left copies with trusted individuals. He leaned closer to the camera, his expression sorrowful rather than angry. If I die suddenly, this is why. Not because my heart was weak, but because my own children made it so. The recording ended. Zoe sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. We need to call Wellington, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. And the police. Noah cleared his throat. There's one more file you should see first. It was a short video from Grandma Rose, recorded just 2 months before her stroke. Emma, my darling girl, she began, looking much as she had in the testimony video we'd shown at Patricia's house. If you're seeing this, then you've found Harold's ring and the memory card inside. I've kept this evidence safe all these years, waiting for the right time. But I want you to understand something very important. She leaned forward, her eyes intense and clear. Justice matters. Truth matters. But so does mercy. I've had 30 years to consider what to do with this evidence. 30 years to observe what Robert and Patricia have become. They built their success on theft and betrayal, yes. But they've also created companies that employ hundreds of people, that contribute to the community in ways Harold would have approved of. She sighed deeply. I'm not asking you to bury this evidence, but I am asking you to consider carefully what justice looks like after so much time has passed. The foundation you're creating, yes, I know about that. Wellington has kept me informed of your plans. Might be a better legacy than prison sentences for your father and aunt. This is your decision now, not mine. I trust you to find the right balance between justice and mercy, as Harold would have trusted you. When the video ended, Zoe and I sat in stunned silence. What are you going to do? She finally asked. I stared at the black screen, my mind racing. I don't know yet. The meeting with Dr. Lewis took place 3 days later in Wellington's office. The doctor was a small, nervous man with thinning white hair and hands that trembled slightly as he placed a folder on the conference table. "I want to make it clear that I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do," he began, glancing uneasily at my father and Aunt Patricia, who sat stone-faced across from him. Their lawyer, Brenner, looked equally grim. "Just tell us what you know," Wellington encouraged. Lewis nodded. "After Harold Parker died, I was asked to sign the death certificate listing the cause as myocardial infarction due to coronary artery disease. This was consistent with his medical history, so I didn't question it." "Which means there was nothing improper," Brenner interjected. "Please let him finish," Wellington said firmly. Lewis continued. "About a month later, I received lab results from tests Mr. Parker had requested privately, without going through his regular medical channels. The results showed his heart medication had been adulterated, diluted to approximately half its proper strength." My father's face remained impassive, but a muscle jumped in his jaw. "Why didn't you report this at the time?" I asked. Lewis looked down at his hands. "Robert came to see me, said there had been a mix-up at the pharmacy, that it wasn't relevant to his father's death. He implied that raising questions would only cause pain to the family and might damage my professional reputation." "You were threatened," Wellington clarified. "Not explicitly," Lewis conceded, "but the message was clear. And I was young, building my practice. The Parkers were influential patients." Patricia finally spoke, her voice brittle. "This is pure speculation, a misunderstanding about prescription strength that has nothing to do with my father's death." "Except that Harold suspected his medication was being tampered with," I said quietly. "He documented it, recorded it, left evidence." I nodded to Wellington, who played Grandpa's video statement. As it played, the color drained from my father's face. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth, a small sound of distress escaping her. When it ended, Brenner leaned forward. "This video proves nothing. There's no chain of custody, no verification of its authenticity." "There's more," I said. "The audio recordings, the documentation of the lab tests, the same ones Dr. Lewis received. And now, Dr. Lewis's testimony. After all this time, you can't possibly prove that any medication tampering, even if it occurred, contributed to Harold's death," Brenner argued. "Perhaps not conclusively in court," Wellington countered. "But there's certainly enough here to warrant a police investigation, enough to make headlines, enough to raise serious questions about the foundation of Hartwell Finance and Patricia's luxury developments." The threat was implicit but clear. Their reputations, their businesses, everything they'd built over 30 years could come crashing down. "What do you want?" my father asked, his voice hollow. He looked suddenly older, defeated in a way I'd never seen before. I thought of Grandma Rose's final message to me, about justice and mercy, about what kind of legacy would best honor Grandpa Harold's memory. "I want the truth," I said simply. "Not just for me, but for everyone in this room. No more lies, no more secrets." "And then what?" Patricia demanded, tears in her eyes. "Prison? Public humiliation? Destruction of everything we've built?" I took a deep breath. "Then we find a way forward that honors the truth while allowing for redemption. The foundation is already doing good work. Perhaps there's a way to acknowledge the past without destroying the future." My father stared at me, something like wonder in his expression. "You sound like him, like Harold." "I'll take that as a compliment," I said. We talked for hours that day, painful truth after painful truth emerging. My father and aunt admitted to tampering with Grandpa's medication, not with the intent to kill him, they insisted, but to make him seem less competent, to create a situation where they could justify taking control of the company for his own good. They hadn't anticipated his heart attack, they claimed. though they had seized the opportunity it presented. Dr. Lewis provided his written testimony. Wellington documented everything. And I listened, trying to balance the competing claims of justice and mercy that Grandma Rose had entrusted to me. By evening, we had reached a resolution of sorts. My father and aunt would step down from their companies, transferring leadership to qualified successors. They would make full confessions to their families. Substantial portions of their personal wealth would go to the foundation, expanding its work dramatically. They would serve the foundation not as advisors but as volunteers, working directly with the communities they had once viewed only as markets to be exploited. It wasn't perfect justice. Part of me still wanted more definitive consequences. But, as Grandma Rose had understood, sometimes the harder path is not the pursuit of punishment, but the creation of something redemptive from the ashes of betrayal. Zoe drove me home afterward, both of us emotionally drained. "Do you think they really regret it?" she asked as we turned onto Maple Street. "Or are they just sorry they got caught?" "I think regret is complicated," I said after a moment. They've had 30 years to justify their actions to themselves, to build identities around the lie that they deserved what they took. Real regret will take time, if it comes at all. She nodded thoughtfully. "And what about forgiveness? Are you going to forgive them?" The question caught me off guard. Would I? Could I? I thought of Grandpa Harold's video, of the sadness in his eyes when he spoke of his children's betrayal. I thought of Grandma Rose, keeping the evidence safe all those years while maintaining relationships with the people who had hurt her so deeply. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Forgiveness isn't something you can force, but I think I'm willing to be open to the possibility. Someday." As we pulled up to the Victorian, now the headquarters of a foundation built on truth, rather than deception, I felt the weight of Grandpa's watch in my pocket. Steady, reliable, moving forward 1 second at a time. Just like healing, just like justice, just like forgiveness. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, 2 years to the day after I'd first received Grandma Rose's will. Thick cream paper with a watermark, addressed in my father's distinctive handwriting, a gesture that couldn't have been coincidental. Inside was a formal card announcing his retirement from Hartwell Finance and inviting family and colleagues to a ceremonial transition of leadership. At the bottom, he'd written a personal note. "I'd be honored if you'd attend. There's something I want to share with you." I set the invitation on my desk at the foundation, running my finger over the embossed lettering. In the 2 years since our confrontation over Grandpa's evidence, my relationship with my father had evolved into something I never could have anticipated. Not warm exactly, but honest in a way it had never been before. We worked together at the foundation several days each week, him fulfilling his commitment to service, me overseeing the growing organization Grandma Rose's inheritance had made possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Got Dad's invite. You going?" I texted back, "I think so." "You?" "Wouldn't miss it." "Dylan, too. Meet beforehand for moral support?" I smiled. My cousins had become true allies over these past 2 years, our shared dedication to the foundation creating bonds that our parents' machinations never could have severed. Absolutely. 6:30 at the Riverside Cafe. The retirement ceremony was held at the downtown headquarters of Hartwell Finance, the gleaming skyscraper that had once symbolized my father's triumph, now serving as the backdrop for his carefully orchestrated exit. The reception area was crowded, with business associates, community leaders, and family members, all mingling beneath tasteful banners announcing "A Legacy of Leadership." I arrived with Zoe and Dylan, the 3 of us drawing curious glances as we entered together. We'd become known in business circles as the new generation of Parkers, the cousins who ran the increasingly influential Harold and Rose Parker Foundation, rather than following our parents into finance or development. My father spotted us immediately, excusing himself from a conversation to approach. He looked different these days, still impeccably dressed, still commanding, but with a newfound humility that softened his sharp edges. "You came," he said, sounding genuinely pleased. "All of you." "We wouldn't miss such an important transition," I replied, keeping my tone professional but not cold. "There's someone I want you to meet," he said, gesturing to a young woman standing near the podium. "Vanessa Liu. She's taking over as CEO." The introduction surprised me. Vanessa was in her late 30s, with a background in ethical investment and sustainable business practices, not the kind of successor I would have expected my father to choose. "Ms. Liu has some fascinating ideas about repositioning Hartwell Finance," my father continued. "More aligned with what the foundation has been doing, actually." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Vanessa smiled, extending her hand. "Your father has spoken of your work often, Ms. Parker. The microfinance initiative for women entrepreneurs particularly impressed me. I'm hoping we might collaborate on expanding that model." "I'd like that," I said, meaning it. The ceremony itself was predictably polished. Speeches about legacy and future vision, a symbolic passing of leadership from my father to Vanessa, applause at all the right moments. What wasn't predictable was my father's closing remarks. "When I joined Parker Developments 35 years ago," he began, "my father, Harold Parker, told me something I didn't fully understand until recently. He said that a business is not measured by its profits, but by the integrity of its operations and the positive impact it has on people's lives." Murmurs rippled through the audience. This wasn't the Robert Hartwell most of them knew. The cutthroat financier who'd built his empire through aggressive acquisitions and strategic maneuvering. "I didn't listen," he continued. "I chose a different path, one focused on growth and personal gain above all else. It took me 3 decades and the wisdom of my daughter." He paused, looking directly at me, to recognize that my father had been right all along. He gestured toward Vanessa. "That's why I've chosen Ms. Liu as my successor. She understands what I failed to grasp for most of my career. That sustainable success comes from creating value, not just extracting it. Under her leadership, Hartwell Finance will begin a new chapter, one I believe my father would finally be proud of." The room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Polite from those confused by this philosophical pivot, enthusiastic from those who had been advocating for such changes. Afterward, as guests dispersed into smaller conversational groups, my father approached me again. "There's something else I'd like to show you," he said. "In my office, if you have a moment." I followed him to the executive suite on the top floor, a space I'd visited only rarely over the years. He led me into his private office, closed the door, and went to a wall safe hidden behind an abstract painting. "When we spoke 2 years ago," he said as he worked the combination, "you asked for the truth. I gave you part of it, but not all." My guard immediately went up. "What do you mean?" He removed a folder from the safe and placed it on his desk. "After your grandfather died, Patricia and I found this in his personal files. We kept it hidden, another deception to add to our growing collection." I opened the folder cautiously. Inside was a business plan, dated, detailed, impeccably researched, for transforming Parker Developments into a corporate foundation focused on community investment and entrepreneurial mentorship. Grandpa Harold had been planning to convert his company into something remarkably similar to what our foundation had become. He was going to announce it at the board meeting the week after he died, my father said quietly. Patricia and I had already begun our plan to take control of the company, never imagining he had ideas of his own for its future. When we found this afterward, "You buried it," I finished, "because it didn't fit with your vision." He nodded, not defending himself. We told ourselves we were being practical, that Harold's plan was idealistic and unsustainable. But the truth is, we were afraid of taking a risk on something that didn't guarantee the wealth and status we craved. I traced my finger over Grandpa's signature at the bottom of the document, feeling a surge of connection to the man I'd barely known, but whose legacy had shaped my life so profoundly. "Why show me this now?" I asked. "Because you deserve to. Know that what you've built with the foundation isn't just what Rose wanted. It's what Harold envisioned too. You've created what he never got the chance to." My father's voice caught slightly. "And because I wanted you to understand that what I said downstairs wasn't just for show, I meant it." I studied him, searching for signs of the manipulation that had characterized so much of our relationship, but all I saw was weariness, regret, and perhaps a flicker of hope. "Thank you for showing me this," I said finally. "It means a lot to know Grandpa had this vision." He nodded, then hesitated before adding, "There's one more thing. I've established a trust in your name, separate from the foundation, not connected to me or the family. It contains what I believe would have been your rightful share of Parker developments had Patricia and I not interfered with Harold's will. It's yours, no strings attached, to use however you see fit." The gesture stunned me. "Why?" "Because it's yours. Because it always should have been. Because some debts can never be fully repaid, but acknowledging them is a start." I left his office with Grandpa's business plan and the trust documents, emotions swirling. Outside, Zoe and Dylan waited, concern on their faces. "Everything okay?" Zoe asked. "You were gone a while." I handed them the folder. "Apparently, we've been channeling Grandpa Harold's vision more directly than we knew." As they looked through the documents, expressions of wonder and vindication crossing their faces, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet. But the loosening of a knot that had been tight for a very long time. The next morning, I sat in Grandma Rose's garden behind the Victorian, now blooming with late spring flowers. The foundation offices wouldn't open for another hour, giving me rare quiet time to reflect on the previous evening's revelations. I held Grandpa's watch in my palm, feeling its steady tick. Beside me on the bench was his business plan, the vision he hadn't lived to implement. And in my other hand, a letter I'd been drafting to my father, not accepting his gesture of restitution, outright, but suggesting we use the trust to create a scholarship fund in Grandpa Harold's name, focused on ethical business leadership. The garden gate creaked open, revealing Keisha with 2 coffee cups in hand. "Thought you might be out here," she said, offering me one. "Contemplating the universe?" "Just family," I replied with a small smile. "The universe seems simpler somehow." She sat beside me, surveying the blooming garden. "The new community center plans came through, by the way. Construction can start next month." "That's great news." "Your grandparents would be proud, you know," she said after a moment. "Not just of the foundation, but of how you've handled everything." I thought about the past 2 years, the painful revelations, the difficult decisions, the unexpected paths toward healing that had opened up when I'd chosen truth over concealment, growth over retribution. "I hope so," I said. "I've tried to honor what they valued most. Integrity," Keisha nodded, "and forgiveness." "I'm still working on that last one," I admitted. "That's the thing about forgiveness," she replied. "It's not an event. It's a process. Kind of like that garden. You plant the seeds, you tend the soil, you wait for growth. Sometimes it takes seasons." As we sat in comfortable silence, watching sunlight spread across the flowers Grandma Rose had planted years ago, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected to find so soon. My father and aunt had taken what wasn't theirs: money, opportunity, trust, even years of Grandpa's life. But they couldn't take the legacy of values that had survived in spite of their betrayal. The foundation's morning staff began arriving, bringing with them the energy of purpose and possibility. Soon we'd be reviewing grant applications, meeting with community partners, continuing the work that gave meaning to Grandma Rose's inheritance. I slipped Grandpa's watch into my pocket and gathered my papers. The past couldn't be changed, but the future remained full of potential for growth, for impact, for the slow, steady work of healing what had been broken. As I walked back toward the Victorian, now transformed into a place of service rather than secrets, I thought about how legacies work. Not just the material inheritance that had started this journey, but the deeper bequest of values that had guided me through it. Grandma Rose had been right, as she so often was. The truth always finds its way home eventually, and when it does, it plants seeds that, with time and care, can grow into something beautiful, something worthy of those who came before and those who will come after. Something like justice, something like mercy, something, perhaps, like forgiveness, said quietly. My father frowned. No. What do you mean, no? I mean, that's not good enough. Grandma Rose left me the estate because she trusted me to do the right thing with it, and with this information. And what would that be? Patricia asked, her voice laced with bitterness. I reached into my bag and pulled out a document I'd asked Wellington to prepare after our meeting. This is my proposal. I'm establishing the Harold and Rose Parker Foundation, using the entire estate. The foundation will have 3 main initiatives: supporting animal welfare, funding education for disadvantaged students, and helping entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds. I slid the document across the table. I'm inviting both of you to make significant contributions to the foundation, not just money but expertise. Dad, you know finance. Aunt Patricia, you understand property development. Together, we could build something meaningful, something that honors Grandpa's legacy the way it should have been honored 30 years ago. They stared at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. And if we refuse? My father asked. I met his gaze steadily. Then the evidence goes to the authorities and to the press. Your choice. Dylan stood up. I want in on the foundation, regardless of what they decide. Zoe nodded. Me too. My father's face reddened. You can't possibly... Actually, it makes perfect sense, Keisha interjected. The foundation would clean up the family name, give you a tax write-off, and keep this whole mess private. Or we can risk prison for fraud and watch your company's stock prices tank when this hits the news. She shrugged. Seems like an easy choice to me. Brenner cleared his throat. If I may, the foundation approach does offer certain advantages, legally speaking. My father and aunt exchanged glances, a silent conversation happening between siblings who, despite everything, still understood each other perfectly. We need time to consider, my father finally said. You have until tomorrow at noon, I replied, gathering my evidence and returning it to the box. After that, Mr. Wellington proceeds as instructed. As Keisha and I turned to leave, Zoe caught my arm. Did you know? Before Grandma died? I shook my head. Not until I read her letter. She wanted to protect me from it, I think. Until it was time. All these years, she whispered. All the family gatherings, the birthdays, the holidays. It was all built on lies. I thought about it for a moment. Not all of it. Grandma's love was real. Her principles were real. I touched Grandpa's watch in my pocket. And now we have a chance to build something real, too. Outside, the night air felt cleansing after the suffocating tension of the house. Stars pricked the darkness above the manicured lawns and towering oaks of Oakwood Estates. That, Keisha said as we walked to her car, was the most badass thing I've ever seen. I laughed, the sound surprising me. I can't believe I just did that. Your grandmother would be proud. I hope so. I looked back at the house, where silhouettes moved behind lit windows. My family, grappling with the truth that had finally found its way home. I really hope so. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. They're arguing, but Dylan and I are standing firm with you. Foundation idea is perfect. Call me tomorrow? Something tight in my chest loosened. You know what? I think she would be. As we drove away, I felt Grandpa's watch ticking against my heart. Steady, reliable, keeping perfect time. Just like the truth. The Harold Parker Scholarship for Ethical Business Leadership launched on a crisp autumn day, 3 years after Grandma Rose's passing. The timing felt right, leaves turning gold and crimson on the trees surrounding the university auditorium. Nature's reminder that transformation could be both inevitable and beautiful. I stood at the podium, surveying the gathered crowd. The inaugural class of scholarship recipients sat in the front row, 10 promising students from diverse backgrounds, each selected for their academic excellence and commitment to ethical business practices. Behind them sat university administrators, foundation board members, and a smattering of Parker family representatives. My father occupied an aisle seat near the back, present but not prominent, involved but not controlling. Our relationship had evolved into something cautiously respectful over the past year, not the easy closeness some daughters enjoyed with their fathers, but a measured connection built on hard-earned honesty rather than obligation or manipulation. The Harold Parker Scholarship represents more than financial support, I said, concluding my remarks. It embodies a vision my grandfather had decades ago, a vision of business as a force for community good rather than merely personal gain. These 10 students are the first to carry that vision forward into a new generation. The applause was warm and genuine. As people rose for the reception afterward, I noticed a woman I didn't recognize approaching the podium, elderly, elegantly, dressed with a bearing that commanded attention despite her small stature. "Ms. Parker," she said, extending a slender hand adorned with a single pearl ring. "Eleanor Blackwood, I was your grandfather's executive assistant for nearly 20 years. I shook her hand, surprised. "I don't believe we've ever met." "No, we haven't. I moved to Arizona after Harold died. Couldn't bear to stay and watch what became of the company." Her direct gaze held no apology for the implied criticism. "But when I read about this scholarship in the alumni newsletter, I knew I needed to come back and meet you." Something in her manner, the forthright assessment, the unflinching honesty, reminded me powerfully of Grandma Rose. "I'm glad you did, Ms. Blackwood. I'd love to hear about your time working with my grandfather. That's why I'm here." She glanced around at the mingling crowd. "But not in this circus. Can we meet somewhere private? There are things about Harold you should know, things even your grandmother might not have been aware of." My pulse quickened. After all the revelations of the past 3 years, what secrets could possibly remain? "Of course. My office at the foundation is just a short drive from here." An hour later, Eleanor Blackwood sat across from me in the study that had once been Grandma Rose's reading room, now repurposed as my private office at the foundation headquarters. The Victorian's character remained intact. Leaded glass windows, original woodwork, the faint scent of lemon polish. But the space now hummed with purposeful energy. "You've done well with this place," Eleanor observed, looking around approvingly. Harold would have liked the balance of preservation and progress. "Thank you," I said, pouring tea from the service my assistant had brought in before discreetly withdrawing. "Now, what did you want to tell me about my grandfather?" Eleanor accepted the cup, her movements deliberate and precise. "Harold suspected what your father and aunt were planning long before the end. Their betrayal didn't catch him by surprise." "Yes, I know. We found his diary and video recordings where he documented his suspicions." She nodded. "The medication tampering. Yes, he told me about that. But there's something you don't know. The real reason he changed his will to protect the company from them." I leaned forward. I assumed it was because he discovered their plans to take control and split up the business. That was part of it, Eleanor agreed. But there was more. Harold discovered that Robert and Patricia had been embezzling from the company for years before his death, siphoning funds through a network of shell companies to finance their independent ventures. This was new information, beyond what we'd uncovered in Grandma's evidence. How did he find out? I helped him, Eleanor said simply. I noticed discrepancies in the accounts, small at first, then increasingly bold. Harold asked me to investigate discreetly. Over 18 months, we compiled extensive documentation of their theft. But this wasn't in any of the evidence. Grandma Rose collected, I said, confused. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. Because Harold never showed it to her. He was trying to protect her, and you. Protect us from what? She set down her teacup with a decisive click. From the knowledge that Robert's criminal activities extended beyond Parker Developments. In the course of our investigation, we discovered he was laundering money for some very dangerous people, individuals connected to organized crime in several states. The revelation hit like a physical blow. My father, for all his ethical failings, had always seemed too calculating, too concerned with his reputation for such blatantly criminal behavior. Are you certain? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Absolutely. Harold hired private investigators to verify everything before he acted. He was preparing to confront Robert, to force him to cut ties with these people and make restitution to the company. The heart attack happened before he could do so. And afterward, I said slowly, my father and aunt took control, dissolved the company, and covered their tracks. Eleanor nodded grimly. Exactly. The original company records were lost in the restructuring, but not all of them. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a small external hard drive. Harold gave me this for safekeeping the week before he died. It contains everything we found: the embezzlement, the money laundering, the connections to criminal organizations. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right time. I stared at the small device, its potential implications overwhelming. Why now? Why bring this forward after all this time? Because of this scholarship. Because I read about the foundation, about what you've built from Rose's inheritance. It told me you were the one Harold would have wanted to have this information. Her gaze was steady, evaluating. He always said you had his moral compass, even as a child. What am I supposed to do with this? I gestured to the hard drive. The statute of limitations has surely expired on the embezzlement, and bringing forward evidence of money laundering now, decades later, would destroy your father and possibly endanger you, Eleanor finished. I'm not suggesting you go public with this. I'm giving it to you because you deserve to know the full truth. About your family legacy, both the good and the bad. What you do with that knowledge is entirely your decision. I picked up the hard drive, feeling its weight, physical and metaphorical, in my palm. Does my father know you have this? No, but he knows it exists. Harold told him as much during their last argument, said he had proof that would bring down more than just the company if Robert didn't stop his criminal associations. She paused. It may be why they acted when they did, to silence Harold before he could expose them. The implication hung in the air between us. Not just medication tampering to make Grandpa seem incompetent, but a more deliberate silencing to protect themselves from criminal exposure. Thank you for bringing me this, Ms. Blackwood, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. I'll need time to process what you've told me. She stood, gathering her things. Of course, I've left my contact information with that nice young woman at the reception desk. If you have questions after you've reviewed the materials, I'm available. She paused at the door. Harold would be proud of you, Emma. Not just of this foundation or the scholarship, but of your integrity in dealing with difficult truths. That mattered to him more than anything. After she left, I sat motionless at my desk, the hard drive before me like Pandora's box. Just when I thought our family's secrets had been exhausted, this new revelation threatened to upend everything again. If what Eleanor claimed was true, my father's crimes went far beyond family betrayal into something much darker. My hand hovered over my phone. I should call Wellington, get his legal perspective. Or perhaps Zoe and Dylan. They deserved to know what their father might have been involved in. Before I could decide, a knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. My assistant poked her head in. "Sorry to disturb you, Ms. Parker, but your father is here. He says he needs to speak with you. Urgently." A chill ran down my spine. Had he somehow learned of Eleanor's visit? "Send him in." My father entered, looking anxious in a way I rarely saw, his customary self-assurance replaced by a tightly controlled tension. "I saw Eleanor Blackwood at the ceremony," he said without preamble. "She spoke to you." I kept my expression neutral. "Yes, she introduced herself as Grandpa's former assistant." "Did she give you anything?" His eyes scanned my desk, landing on the hard drive. "She shared some memories of working with him," I said carefully, sliding the device into my desk drawer. It was nice to hear stories about Grandpa from someone who knew him well professionally. He didn't look convinced. "Emma, if she gave you documents or files, you need to be extremely cautious. Eleanor had an unreliable perception of certain business matters." "Did she?" I held his gaze steadily. "She seemed quite lucid and precise to me. She was obsessively devoted to your grandfather. After he died, she made some wild accusations, conspiracy theories really, trying to blame Patricia and me for his death. It became so uncomfortable that she was asked to leave the company." "That's not how she described her departure," I noted. My father sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "Of course not. Look, I'm not proud of how Patricia and I handled the company transition. You know that. But whatever Eleanor may have told you about other activities, criminal connections, money laundering, it's pure fabrication." I hadn't mentioned those specific allegations. His knowledge of them confirmed at least part of Eleanor's story. "Why would she fabricate such detailed claims?" I asked. "Grief, anger, possibly mental instability." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Emma, we've worked so hard these past years to rebuild trust, to make amends for our past mistakes. Please don't let the delusions of a bitter old woman destroy that progress." I studied him. This man who had been at once my father and a stranger for much of my life, who had stolen from his own father, possibly contributed to his death, yet who had also shown genuine remorse and made efforts toward redemption. Could I trust anything he said? "I need time to think," I said finally. Today was supposed to be about celebrating Grandpa's legacy through the scholarship, not revisiting old wounds. He nodded, clearly relieved that I wasn't immediately confronting him with whatever evidence Eleanor had provided. Of course, the scholarship launch was impressive, by the way, very much in keeping with Harold's values. After he left, I retrieved the hard drive and stared at it, weighing my options. The truth had already cost our family so much. Relationships fractured, trust broken, comfortable illusions shattered. Did I really want to uncover potentially even more damaging secrets? But then I remembered Grandma Rose's words in her letter. The truth isn't always kind, but it is always necessary. And Grandpa Harold's belief that I would honor his legacy of integrity. I plugged in the hard drive and began to read. The documents on Eleanor's hard drive painted a damning picture. Meticulously organized spreadsheets tracked millions diverted from Parker Developments into shell companies. Investigator reports documented meetings between my father and known associates of organized crime families. Email exchanges, preserved. Through Eleanor's foresight in backing up the company servers, revealed my father's knowledge of exactly where the money was coming from and going to. Most disturbing was a series of photographs showing my father meeting with a man identified as Victor Esposito, a notorious figure in East Coast organized crime during the early 1990s. In one image, they were shaking hands outside an upscale restaurant. In another, exchanging what appeared to be documents in a parking garage. It was nearly midnight when I finished reviewing everything. My head throbbed with the implications. This wasn't just embezzlement or forging a will. This was serious criminal activity with connections to violent organizations. If Grandpa Harold had threatened to expose this, it provided a much stronger motive for my father and aunt to silence him than mere company control. I called Wellington despite the late hour. "I need your advice," I said when he answered, sounding surprisingly alert. "Professionally and personally." "I'm listening." I explained Eleanor's visit and the contents of the hard drive, trying to stick to facts rather than emotions. "This complicates matters," he said when I finished, with characteristic understatement. "The statute of limitations has indeed expired on most financial crimes from 30 years ago. But for certain activities related to organized crime, particularly if they continued beyond the initial period." "Do you think they did? Continue, I mean?" Wellington paused. "It would be unusual for someone to completely sever such connections, especially if they proved profitable. Those relationships tend to be persistent." "Are you saying my father might still be involved with these people?" "I'm saying it's a possibility we should consider, particularly given the timing of Eleanor's appearance and your father's immediate concern about what she might have shared with you." I rubbed my temples, trying to think clearly through the fatigue and shock. What should I do? Go to the authorities? Confront him directly? "Neither, at least not immediately," Wellington advised. "We need more current information before taking any action that could have serious repercussions. For your father, yes, but also potentially for you and the Foundation. Let me make some discreet inquiries through channels I trust." After hanging up, I sat in the darkened office, Grandma Rose's presence almost palpable in the familiar surroundings. What would she have done with this information? Had she known? Or suspected this darker dimension to her children's betrayal? The next morning, I called in sick to the Foundation for the first time since its inception. I needed space to think, away from the possibility of encountering my father or fielding questions from staff. Instead, I drove to Hemlock Lake, to the vacation cottage that had been part of Grandma Rose's inheritance. The small cedar cabin sat on a wooded lot overlooking the water, rustic but comfortable. I'd kept it largely as Grandma had left it, a retreat from the increasingly complex demands of the Foundation. Here, surrounded by nature and memories of simpler times, I hoped to find clarity. I was building a fire in the stone hearth when my phone rang. Zoe. "Are you okay?" she asked immediately. "Keisha said you called in sick, and you're never sick." "I'm fine," I assured her. "Just needed some time to think. A lot happened yesterday." "The scholarship launch went beautifully," she said. "But something else is bothering you. I can hear it in your voice." I hesitated. Zoe deserved to know about Eleanor's revelations. They concerned her father as much as mine. But I'd promised Wellington to wait until we had more information before taking any action. "It's complicated," I said finally. "I learned some new information about Dad and Aunt Patricia, about their activities before Grandpa died. Potentially serious criminal connections." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. How serious? "Money laundering for organized crime serious." Zoe exhaled slowly. "That doesn't actually surprise me as much as it should." "What do you mean?" "Last year, when we were reorganizing the Foundation's investment portfolio, I noticed some unusual patterns in Dad's personal finances. Accounts that didn't quite make sense, businesses that seemed to exist primarily on paper. When I asked him about it, he became uncharacteristically defensive. This was news to me. You never mentioned this. Because I didn't have anything. Concrete, just suspicions. And things have been going so well with the foundation, with our families. I didn't want to disrupt that without solid evidence. Well, now we might have that evidence, I said. Wellington is looking into whether these connections might still be active. If they are, that could explain some things, Zoe said slowly. Dad's insistence on maintaining control of certain investment properties even after stepping down from active management. His unexplained trips to Miami and Providence every few months. We talked for nearly an hour, comparing observations and concerns. By the time we hung up, I felt marginally better. Less alone with this burden of knowledge, at least. As afternoon faded into evening, I walked along the lakeshore, watching the setting sun paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. The beauty contrasted sharply with the ugliness of what I'd learned, yet somehow the natural splendor helped restore my perspective. My phone rang again, Wellington this time. I have some preliminary information, he said without preamble. My contacts confirm that Victor Esposito's organization has maintained business interests in several properties developed by both your father and aunt over the past 20 years. The relationships appear to be ongoing, though more sophisticated than in the early days. My stomach clenched, so they never stopped. It appears not. There's more. Recent financial transfers suggest your father may be preparing for something significant. Large sums moving through the same network of shell companies identified in Eleanor's documentation, but with new endpoints. What kind of endpoints? Primarily overseas accounts in countries with strong banking privacy laws. The pattern is consistent with someone preparing to relocate assets beyond the reach of U.S. authorities. The implication was clear. You think he knows something's coming, that he's preparing to run. It's a possibility we should consider, Wellington confirmed, especially in light of Eleanor Blackwood's reappearance and his immediate concern about what she might have shared with you. I thought about my father's demeanor the previous day, the anxiety poorly masked by his typical smooth manner, his specific denials of allegations I hadn't even mentioned. What should we do? I asked. I've scheduled a meeting tomorrow morning with a former colleague who now works with the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI, Wellington said. Someone I trust to be discreet. Before we take any irreversible steps, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. After hanging up, I built the fire higher, trying to ward off the chill that had settled deep in my bones. Outside, darkness had fallen completely. The lake now of vast blackness, stretching beyond the cottage windows. I felt similarly poised at the edge of something immense and unknown, a darkness that might swallow my family completely. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Not about yesterday. About what comes next. Dad. I stared at the message, alarm bells ringing in my mind. How had he gotten this number? I'd changed it recently and shared it only with a few trusted people. And what did he mean by, what comes next? Before I could decide whether to respond, headlights swept across the cabin windows. A car was coming up the long gravel drive, unusual for this secluded spot, especially after dark. I moved to the window, peering out cautiously. A familiar BMW pulled up beside my car. My father got out alone and stood for a moment looking up at the cabin. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in his posture, the uncharacteristic hesitation before he started toward the door. I considered not answering, pretending I wasn't there. But the lights were on, smoke rising from the chimney. My presence was obvious. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door before he could knock. "How did you find me?" I asked. "You always loved this place," he said simply, "and I needed to speak with you somewhere private." He glanced past me into the cabin. "May I come in? It's important." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside to let him enter. As he passed, I caught a whiff of his cologne, the same brand he'd worn for as long as I could remember, an expensive scent that had once represented paternal authority in my mind, now tainted by knowledge of its source. "You shouldn't be alone out here," he said, looking around the cabin. "It's too isolated." "I'm fine," I replied. What was so urgent it couldn't wait until I returned to the city? He turned to face me, his expression grave. "Eleanor Blackwood approached the FBI 2 weeks ago with the same information she gave you yesterday. They've opened an investigation. It's only a matter of time before they come for me." The directness of his admission stunned me. "Are you confessing?" "I'm explaining the situation," he corrected. "And I'm here to ask for your help." "My help?" I repeated incredulously. "With what? Evading justice?" "With protecting the family legacy, the foundation, the scholarship program, everything you've built. When this becomes public, it will touch everyone connected to me, including you and the foundation. We need to prepare." I studied him carefully, trying to read beyond his controlled exterior. "That text you sent mentioned what comes next. Are you planning to run?" A flicker of surprise crossed his features. "No, I'm too old to start over in some country without extradition. I'm going to face this, but on my terms." "What does that mean?" He sank into one of the armchairs by the fire, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. "It means I'm prepared to take responsibility for my actions, but I want to ensure that the consequences fall on me alone. Not on you, not on the foundation, not on Patricia or the cousins." "That might not be possible," I pointed out. "If you and Aunt Patricia have been laundering money for organized crime for 3 decades, the ripple effects will be extensive." "Patricia wasn't involved in that aspect," he said quickly. "The embezzlement from Parker Developments, yes. The will tampering, yes. But the Esposito connection was mine alone." I wasn't sure I believed him, but his attempt to shield his sister was oddly touching, perhaps the first purely selfless gesture I'd witnessed from him. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Why not just disappear with all those assets you've been moving offshore?" He looked directly at me, his gaze steady. "Because you deserve the truth. Because I've spent the past 3 years watching you build something meaningful from the ashes of my mistakes. Because running would confirm everything you've always believed about me, and I'd like to think I've changed at least a little." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. Was this a manipulation? Another carefully calculated performance? Or had my father, after a lifetime of deception, finally found the capacity for honesty in the face of inevitable consequences? "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I said finally. "Help me set things right as much as possible before the FBI makes their move. There are accounts, properties, investments that need to be disentangled from the tainted money, assets that could be preserved for restitution, for the foundation, for something positive." "That sounds like financial damage control, not taking responsibility," I observed. "It's both," he insisted. "I can't undo what I've done, but I can try to ensure that my mistakes don't destroy everything else, including your work." I paced the small cabin, mind racing. If what he said was true, if he genuinely wanted to mitigate the damage rather than escape it, perhaps there was a path forward that served justice while preserving what we'd built with the foundation. "I'll need to talk to Wellington," I said, after a long silence. "And I'm not agreeing to anything illegal or unethical. If we do this, it will be about transparency and proper restitution, not hiding assets or evading consequences." Relief washed across his features. "That's all I'm asking. A chance to face what's coming with dignity and to protect what matters." As we sat by the dying fire, beginning to outline the complicated process ahead, I thought about the long, twisted path that had led us here, from Grandma Rose's will to this moment of reckoning. The truth had indeed found its way home, just as she had predicted. Now we had to determine what to build from it. The federal agents arrived at 6:17 a.m. on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after my conversation with my father at the lake cottage. Despite knowing it was coming, despite the careful preparations we'd made with Wellington and a team of specialized attorneys, the sight of dark SUVs and stern-faced agents approaching my father's home still sent a shock through my system. I watched from my car parked across the street, an agreed-upon distance that allowed me to be present without being directly involved in the arrest. My father had insisted I not be inside the house when they came. "No need for you to experience that," he'd said, in a rare moment of paternal protectiveness. He emerged from the front door before they reached it, hands visible, composed and dignified even in this moment of public humiliation. The lead agent said something I couldn't hear. My father nodded, turned to allow them to handcuff him, and was led to the waiting vehicle without resistance. As the SUVs pulled away, my phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "They just took Dad too. Are you okay?" "As okay as possible," I replied. "Meet at Wellington's office at 9? The arrests made headlines by mid-morning. Prominent business leaders Robert Hartwell and Patricia Lowell, N.A. Parker, taken into custody on charges including racketeering, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The media was already digging into their business histories, making connections to organized crime figures, speculating about the extent of the criminal enterprise. The Foundation's phone lines were jammed with calls from journalists, community partners, and concerned donors. I'd prepared our communications team with a carefully crafted statement, expressing shock at the allegations, emphasizing the Foundation's separate governance, and reaffirming our commitment to ethical operations and community service. At Wellington's office, Zoe, Dylan, and I gathered with the legal team to assess the situation. "The prosecution has a strong case," Wellington explained. "Eleanor Blackwood's evidence provided the breakthrough, but federal investigators had apparently been watching certain business connections for years without enough to move forward." "Will they try to seize Foundation assets?" Dylan asked, always focused on the practical implications. "They can't touch anything that came directly from Rose's estate," Wellington assured us. "Those assets were never tainted. The additional contributions your parents made to the Foundation over the past 3 years are more complicated, but we've already filed documentation showing they came from legitimate business sources." "What about the scholarship program?" Zoe asked. "The students are already anxious about whether their funding is secure." "The scholarship endowment is protected," I confirmed. "We made sure of that during the preparation phase." The preparation phase had been an intense 3 weeks of working with my father and a team of forensic accountants to identify, document, and segregate legitimate assets from those connected to criminal activities. We'd established clear paper trails showing which investments and properties were untainted, which required forfeiture, and which fell into gray areas requiring court determination. It wasn't about hiding anything, quite the opposite. It was about creating transparency where decades of deliberate obfuscation had existed. My father had been surprisingly forthcoming, revealing the complex web of financial maneuvers that had kept his criminal connections hidden for so long. "Your grandfather would have been impressed despite himself," he'd commented during one late-night documentation session. "Not with the criminality, obviously, but with the financial architecture. Some of the structures we created were genuinely innovative." "Is that supposed to make me feel better about any of this?" I'd asked. "No," he'd admitted. "Just an observation. Harold always appreciated creativity, even when he disapproved of its application." Now, as we strategized in Wellington's conference room, I found myself in the unexpected position of knowing more about my father's criminal activities than my cousins did about their own father's involvement. "There's something else you should know," I said, looking at Zoe and Dylan. "According to my father, Aunt Patricia wasn't involved in the organized crime connections. The embezzlement from Parker Developments and the will tampering, yes, but not the money laundering for the Esposito organization." Dylan frowned. He said that? That she wasn't involved? He was very specific about it, I confirmed. Said it was his operation alone. Zoe and Dylan exchanged a glance laden with meaning. That's not true, Zoe said finally. Mom was definitely involved. We found documentation in her home office last year. Account numbers, meeting notes, even photographs. With some of these people. We confronted her about it. This was news to me. You never mentioned this. Because she swore it was all Dad's doing, Dylan explained. Said he had forced her to participate, threatened her. We believed her, or wanted to believe her. They're protecting each other, Wellington observed. Your father claiming your aunt wasn't involved, your aunt blaming everything on your father. A final act of sibling loyalty, or perhaps a strategic defense posture. Or they're both trying to shield us from the full truth, Zoe suggested, her voice tinged with sadness. Still manipulating the narrative, even now. The reality was, probably some combination of all these motivations. My father and aunt had spent decades constructing elaborate fictions about their business practices, about their parents, about themselves. Old habits would not disappear overnight, even in the face of federal prosecution. The following weeks unfolded in a blur of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and crisis management for the foundation. Both my father and aunt remained in custody, denied bail due to flight risk concerns. The prosecution's case expanded, as more evidence emerged from raids on various properties and business locations. Through it all, the foundation maintained its operations, even expanding some programs to demonstrate our commitment to the community. Public opinion gradually distinguished between the criminal activities of Robert Hartwell and Patricia Lowell, and the positive work of the Harold and Rose Parker Foundation. Our transparency about the situation, acknowledging the family connection while emphasizing our independent governance, helped preserve trust with stakeholders. 6 weeks after the arrests, I visited my father at the detention center for the first time. I'd resisted earlier, needing distance to process my complicated emotions about his actions and their consequences. But a message delivered through his attorney prompted me to finally make the trip. He had information about Grandpa Harold he wanted to share, something he'd never told anyone. The visiting room was stark and institutional, nothing like the luxurious environments my father had cultivated throughout his life. He looked older, somehow diminished in the standard-issue jumpsuit, though he'd made efforts to maintain his appearance as best he could under the circumstances. "Thank you for coming," he said, as I sat across from him at the small table. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted. "Your attorney said you had something to tell me about Grandpa." He nodded, glancing around at the other visitors and inmates before leaning forward slightly. "I've had a lot of time to reflect in here, about choices, consequences, patterns that repeat through generations. And? Did you know that Harold, your straight arrow, ethical grandfather, began his career working for Victor Esposito's father?" I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "What?" "It's true. Not in the organization's criminal activities," he clarified quickly. "Salvatore Esposito owned legitimate businesses too, construction companies, real estate firms. Harold worked as an accountant for one of them right out of college. It's how he learned the development business before starting Parker Developments." "How do you know this? Grandma never mentioned it." "Because he never told her," my father said. "I only discovered it by accident, going through some of his old papers after college. When I confronted him, he admitted it, said he'd left when he realized some of the money flowing through the companies wasn't legitimate. He was very clear about having no involvement in anything illegal." I processed this information, trying to fit it into what I knew about my grandfather. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I want you to understand that I didn't seek out these connections randomly. When I needed capital for certain ventures, I remembered the Esposito name from those papers. I told myself it was just business, that I could maintain separation between their activities and mine. He shook his head ruefully. I was wrong, obviously. Catastrophically wrong. You're not suggesting Grandpa would have approved of what you did, I said, an edge entering my voice. No, quite the opposite. I'm acknowledging that he faced the same temptation and made the right choice. The choice I failed to make. He left when he saw the ethical compromise. I dove in deeper. He met my gaze directly. I've spent decades blaming others for my failures, Harold. For not giving me enough control. Rose for not understanding my ambitions. Even you for not being the daughter I thought I wanted. The truth is, every disaster in my life has been my own creation. The rawness of his self-assessment caught me off guard. In all our difficult conversations over the past 3 years, I'd never heard him take such complete responsibility without qualification or deflection. The prosecutors have offered a plea deal, he continued. 20 years, possibility of parole after 12. At my age, that's essentially a life sentence. Are you going to take it? Yes. He folded his hands. On the table. Patricia's taking a similar deal, slightly less time because I've made it clear to the prosecution that I was the primary connection to the Esposito organization. I thought about what Zoe had told me about finding evidence of their mother's involvement. That's not the whole truth, is it? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It's truth enough for legal purposes. Patricia made plenty of mistakes, but getting involved with Victor Esposito was my doing. I can give her that much at least. We talked for another 30 minutes about practical matters. What would happen with his remaining legitimate assets? Arrangements for his personal belongings. Details about the ongoing foundation work. As our time drew to a close, he hesitated, then reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. I know this isn't the kind of thing that can be forgiven, he said quietly, but I want you to know that watching what you've built with the foundation, seeing how you've honored Harold and Rose's values, it's helped me understand what I threw away all those years ago. Not just the money or the company, but the chance to be the kind of person they were. The kind of person you are. I didn't know how to respond. This man had caused so much damage to Grandpa Harold, to Grandma Rose, to our entire family. Yet sitting across from him now, seeing genuine regret in his eyes, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't expected. Compassion. Not forgiveness. Not yet, perhaps not ever completely. But a recognition of his humanity, his capacity for both terrible mistakes and belated understanding. I should go, I said, gathering my things. The foundation board meets this afternoon. He nodded, accepting the boundary. Thank you for coming. And Emma. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. Thank you for doing better with your inheritance than I did with mine. As I walked out of the detention center, autumn, sunlight warming my face, I thought about the strange symmetry of our family story. Grandpa Harold had walked away from the Esposito connection, choosing integrity over easy profit. My father had done the opposite, embracing that darkness and paying the price. And now here I was, trying to build something worthy from the wreckage of both their choices. The wheel turns, Grandma Rose used to say. Sometimes we repeat our parents' mistakes, sometimes we learn from them. The choice, however, is always our own. 5 years passed. The Harold and Rose Parker Foundation had not just survived the scandal of my father and aunt's arrests, it had thrived, expanding its programs and influence throughout the region. The scholarship now supported 50 students annually. Our microfinance initiative had helped launch over 200 small businesses. The community centers we'd established in underserved neighborhoods offered everything from early childhood education to senior health services. I stood on the podium at Hartford, University's business school, looking out at the assembled students and faculty. Behind me hung a newly unveiled portrait of Grandpa Harold, donated as part of the Business Ethics Center named in his honor. Harold Parker understood that true success isn't measured by profit margins alone, I concluded my remarks. It's measured by the positive impact we create, by the integrity we maintain even when facing difficult choices, and by the legacy we build for those who come after us. This ethics center will ensure that future business leaders carry those values forward. The applause was heartfelt. As I stepped away from the microphone, the dean approached to shake my hand. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said warmly. "And not just of the center, but of how you've transformed his vision into reality through the foundation." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely moved. "That means a great deal." The reception afterward was lively. Students clustering around to ask questions about foundation internships, faculty members discussing potential research collaborations. I moved among them easily, no longer the uncertain inheritor, but a confident leader in my own right. As the crowd thinned, I noticed Zoe and Dylan by the refreshment table, deep in conversation with a distinguished-looking older woman I didn't immediately recognize. When they spotted me, they waved me over with eager expressions. "Emma, you won't believe who we found," Zoe said excitedly. "This is Marion Cooper. She was Grandpa's first employee at Parker Developments." The woman smiled, extending a slender hand. "Long before it was Parker Developments. Back then, it was just Harold's big idea and a rented desk in a shared office." I shook her hand, delighted. "It's such an honor to meet you. I've heard so little about those early days." "That's why I came today," Marion explained. "When I read about the Ethics Center dedication in the alumni newsletter, I knew it was time to share some of those stories. Harold was a remarkable man, especially considering where he started." "You mean after leaving the Esposito Company?" I asked. She looked surprised. "Is that what you know?" "Oh, my dear, there's so much more to the story. Harold didn't just leave, he helped federal authorities build a case against Salvatore Esposito's financial operations. He testified in court, despite threats to his safety. It's how he met your grandmother, actually. She was a legal secretary for the prosecution." This was entirely new information. My father had shared only the barest outline of Grandpa's connection to the Esposito family. Nothing about cooperation with authorities or testimony. "I had no idea," I admitted. "Harold never wanted it widely known," Marion explained. "He believed in doing the right thing without seeking credit for it. But he was proud of that choice. Said it set the ethical foundation for everything he built afterward." As we spoke, Marion shared story after story about my grandfather. His determination to create a company that valued people over profit, his mentorship of employees, his refusal to cut corners even when it would have been expedient. The portrait that emerged was of a man even more principled than the version I'd pieced together from Grandma Rose's records and others' recollections. "He knew from the beginning that Robert and Patricia didn't share his values," Marion said, more quietly when the conversation turned to family. "It broke his heart, but he never gave up trying to show them a better way. And he had such hopes for you, even when you were small." "Me?" I was startled. "I was just a child when he died." "Children reveal themselves early," she said with a knowing smile. "Harold used to bring you to the office sometimes. He'd watch how you played, how you solved little problems, how you shared with others. That one has the right instincts," he'd tell me. "She understands fairness all the way down to her bones." Tears pricked my eyes unexpectedly. The idea that Grandpa had seen something worthwhile in me even then, had recognized some quality that connected us across the generations, felt like a gift I hadn't known to hope for. Later that evening, I drove to the state correctional facility where my father was serving his sentence. Our relationship had evolved into something cautiously positive over the years. Monthly visits, occasional phone calls, honest conversations about the past and present. Not the typical father-daughter bond, but something authentic that had grown from the ashes of deception. He looked markedly older now, his hair completely silver, lines etched deeply around his eyes. Prison-aged people faster than normal life. But he stood straighter these days, met my gaze more directly, as if unburdening himself of decades of secrets had literally lightened his physical presence. "The dedication went well?" he asked once we were seated in the visiting room. "Very well," I confirmed. "Full house, positive reception from the university community." "Good." Harold would have appreciated the focus on ethics education. He always said universities taught plenty about how to make money, not enough about how to make ethical decisions. I studied him for a moment, then decided to share what I'd learned. "I met someone today who knew Grandpa from the very beginning. Marion Cooper." Recognition flickered in his eyes. Marion. Yes, I remember her. Sharp woman, completely devoted to Harold and the company. She told me about his testimony against Salvatore Esposito, about how he helped federal authorities build their case. My father's expression shifted subtly. "I see. You knew, didn't you? When you approached the Esposito organization for financing, you knew exactly what Grandpa had done decades earlier." He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, it was part of why Victor Esposito was interested in working with me. A certain poetic justice, he called it. Harold Parker's son coming to them for help. Why didn't you tell me this when you shared the story about Grandpa working for them?" "Because it makes what I did even worse," he said simply. It wasn't just ignoring Harold's ethical example. It was actively betraying his legacy, undoing the brave choice he'd made. He shook his head. "There are some shames that are harder to voice than others." I absorbed this, feeling the pieces of our family history shift and realign in my understanding. "The parole hearing is next month," I said, changing the subject to something more forward-looking. "Wellington thinks the Foundation's support will make a difference." Hope flickered across his features. "That would mean a great deal." "The board is divided," I said honestly. "Some members feel your work with the prison education program shows genuine rehabilitation. Others worry about how your early release might be perceived." "And you?" he asked quietly. "What do you think?" I considered the question carefully. I think people can change. Not easily, not quickly, but genuinely. I've seen it happen with you. I met his gaze directly, and I think Grandma Rose would say that mercy matters alongside justice. Relief softened his expression. "Thank you." We talked a while longer about Foundation business, about Zoe and Dylan's lives, about the community projects closest to my heart. As always, there remained an undercurrent of sadness for what might have been had different choices been made decades ago. But there was something else too. A thread of connection that had survived despite everything, perhaps even strengthened by the hard-won honesty between us. When our time was up, he hesitated before saying goodbye. "I've been thinking about something Harold used to say, that wealth itself isn't good or evil. It's just a tool that reveals the character of whoever wields it." I nodded. "That sounds like him." "I failed that test," my father continued. "Spectacularly. But you haven't. Whatever happens with the parole hearing, I want you to know I see that. And I'm proud of you, Emma. Truly proud." The words caught me off guard, not because he hadn't expressed similar sentiments before, but because for the first time, I found myself actually valuing his approval, not needing it, not seeking it, but appreciating it as one adult might appreciate recognition from another. 3 weeks later, I stood in Grandma Rose's garden behind the Victorian, now a lush oasis in the heart of the Foundation campus. Spring. Blooms spilled from carefully tended beds. Roses, of course, but also tulips, daffodils, and forget-me-nots. The garden had become my thinking place, where I came to make difficult decisions or simply to reconnect with the legacy that had shaped my life so profoundly. In my hand, I held the letter I'd written for my father's parole board, carefully worded, honest about both his crimes and his efforts toward redemption, neither condemning nor excusing, but extending the possibility of a second chance. I'd worked on it for days, weighing justice against mercy, consequences against compassion. Beside me on the bench sat Grandpa's pocket watch, still keeping perfect time after all these years. I often brought it here, a tangible connection to the man whose moral compass had somehow found its way to me despite the intervening generations. "I've tried to get it right," I said softly, as if the watch or the flowers or the spring breeze might carry my words to my grandparents. "To balance what was broken with what can still be healed." As if in answer, a cardinal landed on the nearby birdbath, brilliant red against the clear water. Grandma Rose had loved cardinals, had called them messengers of hope when they appeared in her garden. I smiled at the coincidence, or synchronicity, or whatever it might be called when the universe seems momentarily to acknowledge our human struggles. The bird tilted its head, regarding me with bright eyes before taking wing again, disappearing over the Victorian's roof into the clear blue sky. I slipped the watch back into my pocket, feeling its gentle tick against my heart as I rose to submit my letter. Whatever came next, for my father, for the foundation, for our complicated family, the legacy Grandma Rose had entrusted to me remained secure. Not just the material inheritance that had started this journey, but the deeper bequest of values that had guided me through it. The truth had indeed found its way home. And from that truth, something unexpected had grown. Not perfect, not unmarked by past sorrows, but alive and authentic and pointing toward a future my grandparents might recognize as worthy of their hopes. As I walked back toward the foundation, offices, spring sunshine warm on my shoulders, I carried with me all that had been lost and all that had been found. The inheritance, at last, properly claimed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.